Go ahead.
Dawn Weiss Montgomery, DAWN, WEISS, Montgomery. You want me to spell that?
No, it's cool. Okay.
As in Montgomery, Alabama.
So how did you become involved in the project?
I'm a writer in Nashville. I do a lot of journalism work for various Jewish-related causes. And Ruth Tanner, the executive director of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, and Felicia Anker had invited me to lunch. We went to lunch, we talked about the project, and they commissioned me.
How long ago was that?
I'm thinking it was about 6 to 9 months before the project actually started. We went to lunch, we talked about the goals. They had seen my writing before through The Observer, which is a Jewish publication in Nashville. They understood me to be more of a feature writer. So we kind of talked about how the style in what they really wanted it to be, and we liked it right away. I wanted it, and I was very honored to have been asked.
Right. I'm going to set this thing over here just to see if it. I don't know if this will work. But it might bounce a little bit wide. Like,
That's a good idea.
let's see.
That's a good idea. I love those directors. They're always thinking.
Well, I mean, there's a reflection off of it, so it's going to help some. And what would you say like your relationship to the Holocaust is? I mean, I know you have.
I am a descendant, not a direct descendant. I have great aunts and uncles, great grandparents, second cousins, who are all victims and survivors. 90% of them are Hungarian. I'm Hungarian. Some of the survivors are from. Actually, no, all of them are Hungarian, now that I think about it. Some are living in Israel, most of them are still in Hungary, and some are in New York. But I grew up in a family that never discussed the Holocaust. You never brought it up, you never talked about it. I don't recall having ever a conversation with my parents, grandparents, uncles, ever, not once, to discuss what happened. Just that some died, you don't bring it up, and that's the end of it.
So do you connect with those people who, you know, their parents, you know, like maybe the kids that come with their parents never told them about it. And you know that desire, that need to know sort of thing?
Yeah, but I think it's more than that. I took a Holocaust course about 3 years ago. Actually, my only intention, interestingly enough, was not to get Holocaust information as much as I needed a European history course that was a senior level. And I had taken the course, and in the first couple months, I started to become very curious about how my family related. And as soon as we reached the Hungarian invasion in 1944, that's when I started to really put myself there. And I really started to get emotionally attached. So in essence, I think I related more in a strange way to the survivors than I did to their children or their family, because I repeatedly told myself that as a mother, and I have 2 daughters, had it not been for time and geography, it would have been me being separated from my children or having to decide between the 2 of them. And that was very, very difficult for me to embrace. And it was then that I started to read more about it, become more involved. I began a coordination of getting Holocaust discussions in my family. I started to talk to my dad about it. I started to get in touch with Hungarian relatives that I'd never met before, that my own father had never met before. And within a year, we had a family reunion scheduled in New York where they were coming from all over the world. And one of them was in his 80s, and he was in Auschwitz, and he was a grave digger. And he told me the story at the reunion, and he was crying. And I was speechless, and I just said, I don't know what to say. I don't know what I can do. And he just looked at my 2 daughters, Madeline and Ava, and he said, tell them promise me you'll tell them. And it was always so moving for me because it's all he wanted me to do, you know? So I feel in a lot of ways that I'm doing that, I think.
Yeah, he wanted people to know.
He wanted people to know, and he'd never talked about it before.
Well, I know that your job as an interviewer, how did you select, or how did you arrive at the questions that you're using?
I did a lot of research from various sites. I bought several books on, actually one of the better ones that I read was called Oral History, the Shoah. And Shoah actually means sacrifice. It actually means, Holocaust actually means sacrifice. A lot of Jewish survivors did not want to refer to it as the Holocaust because they said it means sacrifice. They chose not to sacrifice. And Shoah is the Hebrew word. So they use Shoah and they're more comfortable with it. A lot of books about the Shoah. I contacted the Shoah Foundation, got their list of questions, did a lot of internet research.
Is the Shoah Foundation kind of the definitive?
Probably. With regard, they took on the biggest project in history. I mean, is with the relations. Their goal was to have every single Holocaust survivor documented. So they interviewed, I think, 160,000 survivors. Their questions were very intensive, very long, very, very, very well documented, very well, good questions.
Fact-driven.
Fact-driven, not very emotionally driven. Very fact-driven. I'm probably more emotionally driven. So in some essence, I did want to know about the camps. I wanted to know about what happened, where, what dates, who was there. But as a mother, as a human being, as a Jew, I wanted to know where they thought God was. I wanted to know how they went to sleep at night. I wanted to know those things. So in interviewing, I say, tell me about the camp, tell me about your job, and then we wait a while and I say, let's talk about your faith. Let's talk about what pulled you through. Let's talk about some of the more, I think, humanist stuff. Some of the stuff that, and I find that that's what draws the most emotion from that. That's certainly what draws the most emotion from me. And I have found the answers to be completely different on every occasion.
Right. And something I kind of wanted to get into. I have a couple questions, like kind of about the process of the project. What would you say the process of this project is? Because it's not just interviews; it's also photographs. So I kind of want to talk about that.
Well, I could give it to you really quickly. The process was initially confirming the database. Made sure every survivor, and then from those survivors that we contacted, verifying addresses and phone numbers. That was like key. Then from there, checked with their survivors to see if we missed any other survivors. Then we did a press release just to make sure there was any other survivors and World War II liberators, refugees, escapees, and hidden children.
Yeah, that's in the next room.
So the survivors, we had to first define what makes a survivor. Of course, anyone who lived in Nazi-occupied Nazi-occupied Europe under persecution from 1938 on. But then there's some that escaped before 1938 that were still part of the Nuremberg laws, still suffered terrible anti-Semitism. So we didn't want to be in the business of ruling out survivors, but we had to set some kind of guideline. So we decided that it was anybody who was alive during Kristallnacht, which was the most famous. Kristallnacht means Night of Broken Glass, the most famous invasion. That's really when people were literally taken from their homes and had no idea what was happening. From that moment on, then once we made the guidelines, checked the database, then we started contacting them. We contacted survivors by mail, sent them a letter explaining the project, explaining to them that it was going to be an exhibit, their stories were valid and important, and we wanted to talk to them. And then from there, I contacted each and every one of them. We talked at length about what the goal was. We talked about, give them a comfort level of who they were talking to. These are private stories. Some of these have never been told. And I needed to make sure they felt really comfortable with who I was and what I was about, that this was not about making money off of them. This was about educating people. So we went through the process that way.
And how is this in Tennessee? How is it special or different?
It's unique because, I don't know this for sure, but I can find this out in just a week or so. I believe we are the only state in the entire country to do this. We are one of the few states in the country that actually has a commissioned organization that's state-run, Tennessee Holocaust Commission, made up of survivors, descendants of survivors. Felicia Anker and Ruth Tanner are both children of survivors, and they're the executive director and the chair. It's unique because we're limiting them to just Tennessee. Being Southern Jews, it's already a little unique in and of itself. So the fact that the survivors came to Tennessee, we really wanted to know why. What brought them to Tennessee? Most of them are from their families. Most of them felt safe here. But it was interesting, and keeping it in Tennessee, where there's, without the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, there's zero education about the Holocaust. And this gives them an opportunity. Touring this exhibit through the state gives every small town an opportunity to bring their schools and say, here's what happened in your town with liberators and Holocaust survivors.
So you've talked about how some of the stories are, each of them is different in its own way, unique.
Right.
How, tell me some of the variations of stories that you have, or how are the stories different? Or if you want to start with how they're similar, what's the connection that ties them together?
The connection that ties them together, more often than not. So I don't think I've come with one thread that unites every single one of them. But I'd say for the most part, what ties them together was being completely comfortable and at home in Poland and Hungary and Germany, being nationalists and feeling assimilated with their non-Jewish neighbors. And we've had several that say, we weren't Jews, we were Germans. I mean, we were Poles. We didn't say we're Jewish, you're Christian. We're all Polish, we're all German. There was such a sense of pride in their countries, such a sense of love among each other. Not one of them have talked about having a bad childhood. They all talked about being assimilated and happy and sharing, and never once, are you Jewish, I'm Catholic, what does that mean? And so the shock that they encountered was what? Their stories are the same in that they were completely taken by surprise, stunned at what was happening, not by the Nazis, by their neighbors, by their teachers, by their doctors. That one day they were best friends and 2 weeks later they were dirty Jews. It was just so, especially for the children, it's just so confusing. And how could that happen? And there's their similarity. Every one of them was just shocked. The communication was so poor. I mean, that the Third Reich controlled everything. So there was no communication. They weren't able to alert family and let people know what was going on. And they said not in the 20th century were people being exterminated in camps. I mean, it was they said even in Hungary when it was 1944, it says 4 years after Kristallnacht, 6 years after Kristallnacht, not one of them said, are you crazy? Is this the 20th century? They're not putting people in gas chambers. They said the systematic killing of people because they were Jewish. Wouldn't hear of it, couldn't believe it. So the differences then become their experiences. Every one of them talked about hunger. Every one of them talked about fear, betrayal. Again, not by the Nazis. The Nazis were animals. We're talking about the people that were once people and became animals. That's where the anger comes from. The grocer, the shopkeepers, the people that sold them bread the week before were now shutting doors in their faces. As Daniel Goldhagen calls them, Hitler's willing executioners. Those were the people that allowed this whole thing to happen. The Nazis could not have single-handedly murdered 10 million people. It was the neighbors that turned their backs on them. That's what I get the most upset about. Those were the people that could have stopped this.
What's the interview process like for you?
Difficult, very difficult, because I find myself listening and trying not to be emotional sometimes. I'm a mother. I hear the murder of children. I can't get through it. I can't stomach it. I have children. The pain, the displacement, the loss of home, the hunger, the cold. There was a woman today who said, I wasn't a child, I was 12. I was 12, I wasn't a child. And I thought, oh, you were a baby, 12 years old. You know, these people grew up so fast and were so forced and were so surprised. And to have children that came home from school one day and their homes were gone and their fathers were gone and their mothers were crying and their whole life changed and was never the same again. It's very difficult for me to hear that. There's not one interview that I've ever done in my life, one testimony that I've read, that I haven't felt something.
So you feel connected with
Completely connected.
How do you, I mean, I've thought about this myself, like when someone's telling me their story or telling you their story, how do you see it? You know, how do you, like, you know, is it something that you relate to your life? Are you
Yes.
hearing their story?
Yes.
Or is it something that you...
Both. I'm listening to their story and I'm sad as another human being and angry as another human being. How could that happen? And I get upset and angry but then, you know, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, and I'm a Jew. So I immediately become, again, I tell myself all the time, had it not been for time and geography, it would have been me. 60 years ago, my family was in Hungary. 60 years ago, it would have been me. My 3-year-old would have been murdered and my 8-year-old would have probably been taken to a camp. And that would have been the end of it.
And today, maybe it's not time, but it's geography. You know?
Right. And because my grandparents made it to New York, you know, in the 1940s, that's it, a boat ride. You know, it's really, it's very difficult for me.
What about taking it home at the end of the day? I mean, what do you take home?
I think I liken it to how maybe police officers and paramedics survive. They have difficulty, they have some trauma over their day on some level or another, but they realize that their work is good and their contribution was pure. And I'm blessed that I have Joseph on this project, who's my partner and my boyfriend. So at night I can talk to him and I can shake it off, and the crew that I'm on this project with is wonderful. We all talk a lot, and the talking is what I think heals a lot of us. We're able to get out a lot of stuff, even if we do it during the day, little in between interviews, we talk real quickly. At the end of the day, we talk. In the morning, we kind of talk. We're all very positive and we're all very committed. And that has what's made this project. That's what I take home with me, the work and the commitment of the people on this crew.
I mean, do you feel like you're adding to the knowledge that we have about the Holocaust?
I think I'm just kind of the messenger. I hate to think that I'm adding to anything because I've done nothing but sit down with people and let them share.
Do you think they're adding to the
Yes.
knowledge we have about the Holocaust?
They're adding to the knowledge. Their life is history. All we're doing is kind of providing a canvas for them to paint it on. But absolutely, their contributions are, in 20 years, they won't be here anymore. None of them. And their stories have to be told. And I'm blessed that actually we've had some circuit speakers, and some have never spoken in their lives. And we have been blessed to be at the birth of someone's very first breakthrough and someone's very first moment of embracing their past. It's powerful.
So you're giving them a canvas. What else are you giving them, would you think? What these people?
You know, some of them feel that no one cares anymore. Some of them feel that, yeah, it's happened, it's in the past, it's, you know, why bring it up, you know? And I think having us here saying, you know, we're an organization run by the state. Our goal is to educate kids and to educate people so that you will never, ever be forgotten, I think gives them a sense of purpose. You know, what they've had to go through, I could spend the rest of my life listening, and I'll listen as long as they want to talk. They've earned that.
What's it like interviewing survivors and liberators? It's kind of unique.
Very unique. And one of the things that Joseph and I talked about was we always make sure the liberators know what the survivors have said about them, because the liberators have had such an interesting and humble approach. We've had 2 Jewish liberators that their experience was entirely different than non-Jewish liberators. But they've all said it was just another day at the office for us. They feel wounded and terribly emotional about what they've encountered. All of our survivors have said that they had no idea. They knew maybe there was a factory with some inmates, maybe some political prisoners. One got a tip off a couple days earlier that they may be Jews and some political prisoners. None of them were told that these were 60-pound human beings, moving skeletons. And so when they came into the camps and they saw the bodies, they talked about, well, we liberated them, but, one wrestled with, had he been there a day earlier, he could have saved the women and children. But had he been there a day later, that camp that he liberated would have been exterminated. So he wrestles with a lot of guilt about had he been there earlier. It's been fascinating talking to them. And we make absolutely sure that the liberators know that the survivors have said that that day of liberation, as one described it, was his second birthday, the birth of his freedom, and that they never forgot the looks of the soldiers, and they never forgot that moment, that date, that time that they showed up. As the liberators need to know that too.
That's kind of something you can, because of your involvement in the project, you can give to them.
We've had that opportunity, and it has been joyous. Every one of them, we've said that too, has been moved to tears on some level, and what can I do? What can I possibly do? I can't take the pain away. I can't take the memories away. If I can offer something that says, I just spoke to 10 survivors, and they can say that they remember the look in your eyes when you walked into the camp, and the joy that they felt, and the ability and the freedom that they felt because of you, because you walked in. Every one of them has been moved to tears. And if they leave just feeling like that we talked to people who were grateful that they were alive, that they showed up that day, fine by me. If that's all I can contribute, I'm happy.
Now, with the photography and all that, what do you think the photographs do for this project?
Oh gosh, the photographs are so relevant to the cause. They are the visual image of the story that they're reading. They're a complete partnership. When they read the story, they could still see the pain in their eyes 50, 60 years later. And when they see the pain in their eyes, they could read the story and know where it comes from. It's the perfect marriage, and Rob does an amazing job of capturing that. It's not just a portrait, it's an actual visual testimony. And that is very powerful. It was very important to Rob that they speak first and then meet with him. And initially I understood that, but I really understood it because they looked differently to me. We did temporarily bring them back a little bit, and their faces changed, and it's amazing.
Who was it that said today that he could tell people by their eyes that they had been through the Holocaust and that they were survivors? One of them.
That was Yaakov Kramerman who said that he can look into the eyes of Jewish survivors and know the survivors from the non-survivors. And there was actually a couple that we met a couple days ago in Nashville that said they don't have to tell each other about the Holocaust because they can be together and they can experience it and feel safe with each other without ever having to talk about it. Because there was a bonding there that surpassed words. And there's real power in that.
What do you want to tell people through the project? What's kind of... That's a big question.
It is, but it's the same question that I ask these survivors, and they all pause too. Hate and evil and racism destroys people. If I can just tell the story, if I can take my skill as a journalist, if that's all I'm doing is scripture. We talk so many times to survivors, and in the ghettos, the doctors would heal the other residents of the ghetto, and the shopkeeper was able to give extra vegetables to people, and the watchmaker was able to heal. It's like I feel along those lines, while I'm not in a camp or a ghetto by any means, I'm able to take my small little contribution to the world in journalism and tell the story. and I want people to read it. I want them to know that 60 years ago, your lifetime, your parents' lifetime, this century, sort of, the last century, but this time, people were taken from their homes and children were murdered and people were destroyed and tortured and starved to death. 60 years ago in this country. And you, as an American, as most of the Americans will be watching it, in your country, they did nothing. Nothing. I mean, the government 60 years ago did nothing. And I want them to know that.
What about people who denied it then, and then there's the issue of Holocaust deniers now?
They'll always exist. I don't know that they can believe such evil exists. I think no one has been able to understand the systematic killing of 10 million people. No one. No one's been able to explain it. Elie Wiesel, Simon Wiesenthal, these are people that they've spent their entire life representing Holocaust survivors. They can't explain it. Holocaust deniers and deniers of all kinds of things will always exist because they refuse to believe. Those are the same people, the Holocaust deniers are made up of the same fabric that the neighbors outside the wall in Dachau said we didn't know what was going on. They're the same fabric. The same time that we can say in Munich, which was 15 miles from Dachau, where were you when millions of people were being tortured and starved, when the soldiers said for miles they could smell it and hear it and see the smoke? Where were you? Those are the same fabric that Holocaust deniers today are made up of.
Well, I had two other questions that I was thinking about that you kind of talked about, but how is your faith involved in this project? I know that's something key to you. You ask every person,
Right.
But describe that. What requires you to come to this project? Is it your faith?
Judaism is a very big part of my life. It's a very important part of my life. In Judaism, we are told as Jews that we are judged by God by our contribution to the world. I would like to look at this as what's called a mitzvah, which is like a righteous obligation, like a charity of sorts. I don't do it because I'm obligated by Judaism to, but I want to. I want to be obligated to do this. It's important. We have to do this. And it's a labor of love. It's not about money. It's not about anything other than the intense connection that I have to God and the feeling. But no question, at night, I go to bed and say, okay, God, I know you're in my life. I know you've created my children and put all these wonderful things in my life. Where were you in 1939? And I can't answer that either.
When you go into an interview or maybe in the project as a whole, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for whatever they want to give me, because the first couple interviews I went in with an agenda, and I learned fairly quickly that there is no agenda. Some of the circuit speakers who have been speaking for 30 years were moved to tears, and I feel like they felt safe to talk to me and to be as together and organized. Some of these were authors. They had their books and their files, and they were so organized. We're still brought to tears, and I felt honored to be able to share that. So I hope every time that what I get from them is a sense of safety. I hope they feel safe with me. I hope they trust me, that I'm going to tell the story exactly as they've told me. And I hope they feel okay when they leave. Every interview, I'm very careful to spend the last 5 to 10 minutes talking about their grandchildren, what brought them to Tennessee, a little bit lighter to kind of bring them out a little bit. And then we'll be following up with letters to make sure that they have key tools for counseling and social work through the Jewish Family Services and things like that, that they weren't brought in, gutted, and then left. We want them to feel like we were just sharing a moment with them. So I'm absolutely hoping for safety and for trust and for memory.
And many of them, they're proud. I mean, they are proud to be here, which is,
Mm-hmm.
something you don't. I mean, Tennessee is, it's its own little place in a way. And in that thought, with okay, who's going to see this and that sort of thing. I know, like a lot of times we talk about, don't forget, can this happen again? That's a question,
Mm-hmm.
And my belief is that it is already happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's saying that it can happen again. Maybe it doesn't necessarily face
On
the
that
fact
scale.
that it is happening.
Right.
It's the
Right now,
scale.
10 million people aren't being gassed, but look what's happening in Iraq.
Right, and it's the same choice that we have as individuals to decide whether to go with, the side of oppression and maybe their own personal safety, or to go, there are situations, where with torture or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of have a choice to stand against things, and I think that while the Holocaust was systematic, it was still also individual actions that both saved and killed people.
Yes. Yes. I mean, the actions of one Nazi saved 1,100 Jews who ran a fake factory. I mean, those stories, Raoul Wallenberg, a Swedish diplomat who sent out illegal passports to get people out of there. I mean, there were people like that all the time. We had people that talked about people that, it's Polish and Germans who posed as this or that to get people through. I would like to think that would have been me. I would like to think that. I think those stories are important. There just weren't enough of them.
Is it hard to pull the individuals out of, even for survivors you look at the number 6 million, that's, that portion of the war was successful.
Yes.
Successful.
Actually, you said that, and that was a very, very, I had never thought about it that way before, and that was really a good way to look at that, because it was a very successful part of the war. And I hate to look at that as a success. It's such a conflict to say it was a success, because the success in killing people, it was, you were successful. Congratulations. But they didn't think they'd survive, and the Jews have come back, and they have survived, and they have told their children and their children's children, and they're still telling it, and we're going to make sure, I'm going to make sure that my children know about it. And it's my hope that small town in Tennessee, it already happened, a small town in Tennessee, where there's not one Jew in the whole city, had a cattle car, filled with paper clips. And it was an extraordinary project that went worldwide. That's what we're wanting. We're wanting people to feel moved by what they're reading. We're talking about 10 million people in 4 or 5 years. So it's extraordinary. People don't realize it.
Well, do you have anything else that you want to add?
That's my question.
That's everybody's question.
That's the way we go. Okay, we're out of time.
Well, and that's also like
In case I forgot anything?
Yeah.
No, other than just this, one thing I find so amazing is that when they leave, and you were going through this as well, when they leave, they were thanking us. And we felt so humbled. I mean, Joseph is so good about shaking hands with every one of them, especially the Liberators. And the first thing he says is, I just want to stop and thank you for your service to this country. Now, let's talk about, it's so important to remember that. I mean, it's so important. They're so honored to have us in the room with them when we're so humbled by their presence. So it is. I hope that they left, and I hope they felt, looking back at their short time with us, I hope they felt, well, I'm glad I did that. I feel good about doing that. I really hope they felt that way. That would be my wish, that every one of them left with a good experience. On some level, they felt they were actually talking to somebody who really, really cared about what they had to say.
Yeah, it's intimidating in that sense.
It is.
It's an intimidating process.
It is. There are a few of them who went, that's a silly question. What is that? And a part of me feels like, well, I don't know. The one yesterday thought it was really prolific.
Yeah. We weren't there. You got that's why you got to tell them.
You have to tell me, you know, and it was interesting today with Olga when she left, and what did Sophia say? That's not true. The Russian Jews were this, and it's fascinating because that was her experience. While Sophia was saying, that's not true. We owned a house. We were religious. We this. It's fascinating, and it's amazing to see their experiences being totally different. And I'm sure time, 50, 60 years later, a memory is a powerful weapon. You know, it grains in some things, and other things they're going to forget. So it is. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, that's also a hard thing. That's something I was thinking about. Like 10 million people, all individuals, all the deaths were individualized, all the survivors were individualized. And while there was that systematic oppression, and extermination, it's people, individual.
And what people don't realize, 6 million people. Over 2 million of them were children. Children. I mean, the stories just go on and on, What Joseph and I were talking about, I think the deception was one of the most venomous parts of the war. They told them, we're coming to inspect your children, so the people dressed them up in their velvet dresses and their little suits, 5, 4, 3, 2-year-olds, with their good coats and their tights, and they shot them in the street. Right in front of their parents, who thought that if they looked the best, they'd be overlooked, and given back to the families. Yeah. So the deception was the most painful part, I think, for me to hear. That was the hardest.
Yeah, and for me, it's interesting to hear, and I didn't realize the whole 2 separate wars,
Right.
And then there was a difference between the Nazis and German soldier Nazis.
Right, and the SS.
And one had one war and the other had
They were all different. The Polish people had the Germans just plow in. They're running stores. They had no idea. Parts of Germany, they were sort of tipped off because things were getting rough. Polish people were running their stores when the Germans started shooting them in the streets. By the time they got to Hungary in 1944, the Third Reich was already crumbling. Russia was moving in. Hitler was on his last legs. Even the Nazis were jumping ship. So the ones that came in to take over Hungary were like the most deranged and the most fanatic Nazis of all. And they were just wiping them out, just taking them in and just quickly, fiercely, and as if you could be more torturous when you can't. But I mean, the point was, they were like the most fanatical holding on. They had held on to him for 5, 6 years. The smarter ones had said, oh, this is starting to crumble. I got to get out of here. The ones that were hanging on were the most deranged, the ones that were holding on to Hitler until the end. The Lithuanians, 97% of the Lithuanian Jewish population was murdered. 97%. In just a matter of days. Because that was a country, Hungary was the same way. The Hungarians let them in, said, go ahead, take them. All right, go ahead and take them. So much of it could have been prevented had it not been, it's a question. Were they actually persecuted by Germany, or were they sacrificed by their own people? I definitely think it was more of a sacrifice. I do. My opinion. I think they were much more sacrificed by their people, by their own people, than they were persecuted by the Nazis. That's my opinion.